Hello, everyone, and welcome to Classical Revolution here on Idagio. My name is Rachel Fenlon, and this is my weekly show in which I get to chat with fabulous people in the classical music world about creativity and what drives them and thinking outside the box as classical musicians. Today, I'm really thrilled to be joined by Leah Crocetto. Leah is a wonderful soprano whose international career takes her from the United States, Canada, to Europe, singing leading roles. She's celebrated particularly for bel canto repertoire in roles such as Norma, Desdemona, Aida, and Elisabetta. She was the winner of the Grand Prize at the Metropolitan Opera National Council auditions, as well as representing the United States in Cardiff Singer of the World. And I'm really thrilled to have her here today. Please welcome Leah Crocetto. Hi, Leah.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Welcome to the show. I see we've got an extra guest over there.
Yes. This is Ernie.
Hi, Ernie.
He has gone everywhere with me in my career, where all my travels have taken me.
Oh,
so he's like my little travel companion here.
I love it. Hi, Ernie. Welcome to the show. Leah, I love just to begin by asking kind of the earliest introductions to music and whether there are any particular musical moments that stand out for you that you feel like were really pivotal for you becoming who you are as a singer.
Yeah, I mean, I come from a very musical family. Both of my parents were musical. Nobody had sung opera until me, but it had always been, I've always been exposed to opera. It was always played as, regularly on the weekends in my family. So it's very normal when you come from an Italian family to have opera playing, particularly Luciano Pavarotti. That's the first voice I remember making me feel. And I was, 5 or 6 years old when I used to imitate him as a little child. So I also remember my dad singing in church and me thinking, I want to sing in church too. And so my dad saw that I had interest and he bought this, this little vocal workout thing, it was called. It was like all these cassette tapes. And so we used to do these warm-ups in the kitchen together when I was, 10 or something. And so he always pushed me and encouraged me to follow that path. And my mom as well. My mom took me to my very first performance when I was 11. I got to see Carmen. We had a local opera company called Opera Lenawee for, I think it ran for 10 years until it went out of business. But I got to see Carmen. I got to see Tosca, and Tosca was the moment that I decided I was going to be an opera singer and I was going to sing Tosca.
Wow. And how old were you then? Like
12, probably.
Wow. That's amazing. So what was the path like after that? I mean, working your way through teenage years and...
Yeah, sure. I never lost sight of singing opera ever. I took voice lessons from the time I was 13 and always studied classically. Languages came very easily to me. So that was never an obstacle that I had to get over. My whole family was super encouraging. It was almost like God said, okay, this is what you're going to do. And my mind never wavered, and my family's mind never wavered. So they never questioned when I told them that I was going to be an opera singer. So, yeah. So I do have sort of a non-traditional background in the fact that I have an acting degree and not a music degree. So I didn't go about it normal. I didn't go to conservatory. I went to music school for 1 year and I decided that it wasn't for me. I couldn't wrap my brain around all of the theory and the science and all that stuff. So and due to family situation anyway, I had to drop out of school for a couple years. And then I finished my degree in acting when my dad got sick and I had to move back home. I was in New York singing in jazz clubs at that time.
Wow, I read that. Yeah,
So,
okay.
yeah. Yeah, so that's where the sort of non-traditional path comes
Yeah.
in. I was doing all kinds of cabaret shows and such. And then my dad got sick and I moved home and finished my degree. And then he passed away in 2008. And that's when my career took off. So I count my dad as my guardian angel, looking
Wow.
out for me, pulling the strings from up there. So
Oh, well, he must be very proud.
I hope so.
Okay. I actually, when I read about how you kind of come from, or that you sang a lot of jazz, I had a few questions about that as a singer. Are there parts of the jazz tradition that you feel like you carry into classical singing? Or are there any times that you go back to jazz in some way to give you a quality that maybe we don't get as trained
Definitely.
classical singers? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I feel like when I was learning, I do sing a lot of bel canto repertoire.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was learning how to write ornaments and how to improv, and when I coached coloratura for the first time, it was the moment that I remember most clearly. I was working with Matthew Epstein, who was my first manager, and he also has many opinions on uh, singing and performance and such. So I coach with him, and he said, "Go back to your jazz roots. Fill it in like you fill in riffs in jazz." So that clicked something in my mind. And when I'm working on those long coloratura passages and feeling very rigid, there's so much more freedom in those passages than I ever realized until he said those words to me. Go back to your jazz. So, bel canto, if you approach it in a way that you sing and you have the rhythm, the orchestra's there, that doesn't change, but the freedom within the musical phrase is absolutely yours. You make eye contact with the conductor and you meet him at the end of the phrase in rhythm. So you can hold an eighth note, maybe an eighth, a little bit longer, and then come out of it. So it's that idea of give and take. It's that I'm going to stretch this phrase a little longer, but I will give you back the time that I took in the next melisma. So that was kind of a moment for me.
Wow, interesting. And I mean, it's also, I can imagine a lot of freedom, because it's one thing to have that approach with rubato or with taking time, but to put it in the context of jazz too, there must be also, yeah, I can just imagine a lot of freedom, actually.
Yeah,
That's really,
absolutely. And also in regards to using chest voice, a lot of young singers are fearful of using chest voice, whereas I grew up belting show tunes, So I was never afraid to dip into my chest voice pretty freely right from the beginning. So that's another, and I use different facets of my voice, like the mix, that space between the head voice and the chest voice, where you merge them together, is very useful in singing Verdi repertoire, for instance.
okay. Oh, wow. You have an amazing technique, and for the roles you sing, you really have to have this kind of technique. And yeah, I'm such a fan.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
And yeah, I'm curious to hear what for you are the sort of pillars of your technical foundation. I mean, I know that's a huge question for a show, but if you could sort of name what those pillars would be and what you always kind of go back to.
Yes.
What would that
So
be?
when I did my very first Aida, it was in San Francisco, the San Francisco Opera, in 2016. I was going through a major vocal change at that time. I was sort of leaving the little girl sounding, my middle voice was coming in to what it was meant to be. And I did not quite know how to fix it, or how to embrace what was happening in my voice, so to speak. And I called my teacher immediately and I said, "Arnold, what's going on? And he's like, I'm on the next plane. So he came out, spent a week, we warmed up, we did all the things, we did the vocal calisthenics and brought it back to my roots, which is breath support. That is, to me, the cornerstone of my technique. It's the ultimate foundation. Without that, you can't have the technique. You can't have the free top. You can't have the ability to sing through a color to a phrase. And I was getting so wrapped up in, the fiato and the different things that I used to be able to do so easily. I was forgetting about the basis for all technique, which is breath. And I was getting so full of anxiety almost. And oh my gosh, my voice doesn't work anymore, that I was forgetting to ground myself and to ground my breath. So for me, it's all about the breath.
And do you do particular exercises physically as well to warm up the breath, especially?
I do. I used to be the person that didn't like to do any kind of working out or anything on a show day, but now I'm a firm believer in cardio on show days.
Okay.
So it really, I at the beginning of the pandemic, I started running just because I wanted to not, I still wanted to fit into my jeans at the end.
Me too.
Yeah, right. So I started running and so let me backtrack a little bit. Last year I had pneumonia and my lungs completely just were inflamed and had the little, all kinds of stuff going on. And I would wake up even in, as late as June, I was still waking up with the feeling of, my lungs aren't where they used to be. So I started running and that cleared everything out. And I am a firm believer in getting your cardiovascular system moving, because that's your lungs are muscles. Your vocal cords are muscles. You have to use them and expand them and challenge them in order to build them. So I am that's what I do. I also do a lot of steaming, and I do one of those little what are they called? I can't think of the name. They give them to asthmatics. I'm sorry.
Like with a puffer, you mean?
Yeah, but not an inhaler or not a puffer but it's on the tip of my tongue. It's that thing that has a mist that you breathe in and it expands your lungs, and I can't think of the name.
Not a humidifier. No.
I
don't know what it is.
Anyway, I'll think of it at some point and then I'll be like, oh, remember? That's what it is.
Yeah.
It's but I do a lot of breath work almost daily.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it makes it makes so much sense. I could imagine that being a huge, especially for these bel canto roles and this legato and these like never ending lines and phrases too. So yeah,
exactly.
In an interview with Opera Wire, there was an interesting phrase you said. I wanted to ask you a little bit about it, which was, I'm just going to read it out loud.
Sure.
But you talk about being comfortable with also making ugly sounds, and you say sometimes you have to sing on an emotion, and that might mean a less than beautiful sound. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that exactly.
Yeah, sure. I mean, for me, it's about, and maybe that's because of my acting background, I don't know, but it's got to be about telling the story and connecting with the audience. And if you are a perfect flower and you're standing there singing this most beautiful spinning phrase, but there's no heart behind it, or there's no connection with what the story is or what the audience is reading in the super titles, then for me it's almost like I'm lying if I don't put that emotion behind it, if I don't embrace something in my past to make me feel like this character felt. That's also an acting technique, it's method acting or whatever. You think of something that you can relate to in the character that you have been through, and you spin that emotion through what she's saying. And sometimes that is a guttural sound, you know. Sometimes it's there's a moment at the end of Tu che le vanità, for instance, right before the floated high A flat at the end there, or A, I can't remember, I don't have the score in front of me, but right before that she dips down to a low A, and that to me is the depths of despair. And that sound needs to come from your feet, you know. It comes from within the earth. So the emotion needs to be so strong in that note. And you can say the same for Desdemona in the Salce Salce, where she screams, "Ah, Emilia, addio, addio," right? That note comes from so far in her guts that sometimes that note is just wailing. It's not, for me anyway, that's Desdemona is my most performed role. Okay. And it comes from that moment specifically, comes from like the worst pain you can possibly feel. And there are always tears streaming down my face when I sing that moment. And my voice has never really cracked on it, but it's for sure it's not been always, you know, this bright, beautiful A. Sometimes it's blah, you know, sometimes it just comes from a dark place. So that's what I mean about singing on emotion. Yeah. And sometimes there's anger that goes through it too. So.
Exactly. I mean, no, that's, it's kind of, it's somehow the important thing we have to fight for. It is not to just strive for the beauty, but for the embodiment of those very real human experiences, human emotions.
Yes, the reality of what the character is going through. Exactly. Otherwise, it's irrelevant. Why sing it if you can't find human emotion in it? It takes away the relevancy of opera.
Absolutely. I'm also so curious about your role preparation, because so you've done, for example, you did your first Norma last year, is that right? Or
I was supposed, 2 years ago, I did it in concert.
Okay.
And I was supposed to do my first one.
Okay.
My first fully staged one in April. And it was canceled because of COVID. So. Oh. Yeah.
Oh.
That was a particularly devastating one.
I can't imagine, because for you, I mean, has this been a role you've been sort of working towards? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What goes into preparing a role for you? Do you have a very methodical process, or does it change depending on the role, and particularly a role debut?
Yeah, specifically Norma was the longest I ever spent on a role. Years we're talking, you know, at least two. I coached, my first concert version was with Anthony Walker conducting, and my first stage performance of it was also supposed to be with Anthony. And so I coached with him as much as I could. But I always start from the language. I always start from the text, and I interpret, I translate, I speak the text. And I also, but even before that, I listen. You know, I listen to the great singers sing it. And that listening there, it's a great way to start, a great place to start, but it also there's a point where you have to put the recordings away, and it has to become your own. And that's where the text comes in. And that's the regiment of learning, you know, I'm going to learn 5 pages today. I'm going to learn this scene today. Tomorrow I'm going to sing this scene again, but I'm also going to add on to it. So that's kind of what I do. And sometimes I start at the very beginning. Sometimes I start at the very end. because a lot of times the end, you know, depending on if you're a procrastinator or whatever, the end doesn't always get the attention that the beginning does.
Yeah.
So for me, for Norma specifically, I started with the beginning because I'd learned the aria Casta Diva, you know,
Right. Yes.
years ago. But then I went to the end, and then I would go back and forth from beginning to end. And I learned it like that because it's a never ending role. It's the biggest role that I've ever sung. Biggest meaning length. It's the most difficult in the vocal acrobatics that you have to do. In the way that you have to be in touch with your colleagues while you're singing, because the ensemble pieces from that opera are insane as well. So for me, it starts with the text, then it goes to the work shed, you know, the wood shed, where I go through and learn all my coloratura. I write my ornaments. I'll call, for instance, Elizabeth DeShong was my Adalgisa, and we talked on the phone many a time, learning ornaments and figuring out what we were going to do to embellish the duets, because there's so much free space in both of the duets. So, and she writes all of her ornaments as well and plays the piano. She essentially coaches herself. So, so she and I were on the phone a lot, figuring out what we were going to do. Yeah. It was a pretty cool process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you're listening to recordings, who are some of your, I wanted to ask you that, who are some of your favorite singers from the past, from the kind of golden days or whatever?
Of course, Maria Callas. She is the icon of all icons, but I've always loved Leontine Price. She is right up there for me. Montserrat Caballé was I remember the first time I had heard her voice, and it was in 2007. It was right after I auditioned for Marilla. Sherry Greenewald said, "You need to sing Trovatore, and you need to listen to Montserrat Caballé." And I said, "Who is that? And what is Trovatore?" Okay. So that began the devouring of the entire catalog of Caballé and all of the Verdi operas. I just sucked them in as fast as I could. So Caballé and I have had a lengthy relationship. I'm kind of obsessed with her. And I also really admire the mezzo Agnes Balza for the dirt that she brings to her roles. And I mean that in the best way, that sort of earthy, gritty power that she brings to her roles. And she approaches things, I imagine, as I do with the ugly sounds, you know, and the singing through the emotion. I admire her greatly for that. Yeah, so those are the ones that I sort of, you know, can't get enough of.
Yes. Yeah. Great. Something else I wanted to ask you about is you've worked a lot in Europe, where I am right now, and the States. And I thought it would be interesting to hear your perspective on the two different kind of systems, or two different systems of opera production, especially something that we see now during Corona. I feel like we see it even more clearly, the divide between them. And what has your experience, how has it differed singing some of these big roles in these different systems or different houses?
Yeah, well, the biggest difference is the size of the theaters. They're just like barns in the US, and in Europe, they're jewels. They're small and intimate. The process, I don't find too much different in the rehearsal process, except with a remount, which I was a regular in Frankfurt for quite a while, and I haven't been there in a few years. But I would come back and do things that I had originated, and the process would be 6 days, go, sing, be perfect after 6 days. And I did an Otello there that I did not originate, but my good friend Elsa Vandenhever did originate the production. So I was calling her and I was saying, explain the boots all over the stage to me. Explain the concept here. Where are we going with this tutu that I'm wearing? You know, like all these things that I couldn't wrap my brain around, and the remount director couldn't really tell me.
Right.
And I was like, I need something. So I got to talk with Elsa about that, and that became one of my most favorite productions, even though I only had 6 days of rehearsal.
Wow.
Yeah, it was incredible. But I find I don't want to say it's more casual, but it almost seems, I think because of the fest system and because of the way that opera is sort of everyday life, whereas in the US it's placed on a pedestal and it becomes very elitist here. I feel that the artists are very respected in Europe, but the rehearsal process is not necessarily more casual. You're just expected. There is less discussion. This is your job. This is what you're expected to do. I don't want to talk about it. I just want you to show up and do your work. And I find that is less so in the US. And I could be wrong. That could be other people's interpretation could be completely different. But I don't think that's a bad thing by any means. I think it's quite awesome, actually. And I've been really blessed to be able to be a part of both systems. And, you know, in the past few years, I've been mostly in the US and Australia, actually, which is cool.
Yeah.
But so that's what I would say. It's approached with less what's the word, hullabaloo, or less grandeur in Germany, I would say.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, would you agree with that? I mean, you're there.
Yeah, with that, definitely. I think yeah, certainly that it's I mean, it's also just more regular. I mean, it's just happening all the time. So you sort of, there's less kind of circumstance around it. It's just, it's much more sort of integrated. I think we still have in Germany a way to go in terms of outreach, in terms of, I think that's something the States does really well, actually.
I agree.
Is outreach, education, also like, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but like also, I think what you guys do really well is reacting politically to things. For example, in the last months with the Black Lives Matter movement rising, then theater companies responding, and I mean, those things we do.
Yeah, there's a lot of call and response sort of in the political movement in the States. It can still go further, though. I feel like, you know, going back even, you know, to last year, the Me Too movement, I feel like opera companies could have done more there. That's you know, there wasn't a huge step taken, I don't think, in that regard. And you know, that kind of stuff goes on in Europe, and it's never talked about there either. So I think we have done more about that in the US than Europe has. But yeah, I mean, I'm proud to be a part of the American system. I think it's a wonderful system to be in. I'm also proud that I have gotten to be part of the European system too, and the Italian system. I mean, which is completely different from the German.
Right. Exactly.
So it's, you know, every country, every city in the US does things differently, you know. So
kind of speaking about outreach and education, I saw that you're building quite a reputation as a teacher as well. And I wanted to just ask you a little bit about that, and yeah, what that feels for you and what that's been like for you technically as a singer. And yeah.
Yes. So I started before I became able to make a career out of singing. So prior to 2008, I was teaching pretty regularly. Not as well as I teach now, mind you, and mostly musical theater, but I was teaching and I loved it. And, I've been in the business now for 12 years, and people started asking me to do master classes and residencies, and would you be our young artist in residence? And so with all of those things, I kept getting calls to take lessons from me. And I didn't have a lot of time, but when I did, I would be happy to teach, 15 lessons a week. I'll take 3 days and teach 5 lessons a day. Sure. I mean, so I decided I loved it. And at that time, I was speaking with Betsy Bishop, a mezzo soprano, great mezzo who has sung all over the world. And she started this program called the Potomac Vocal Institute. And I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time and performing at the Kennedy Center a lot. And so I asked her if I could teach under those auspices while I was home. And she was like, absolutely. So that started that in DC. And from there, I was asked to come to the University of Texas and do a residency there in Austin, which was great. I did a big master class, and I worked with their entire roster of sopranos for a week, which was awesome. And then Rob Ainsley asked me to be the artist in residence for the K. Fritz Young Artist Program at the Washington National Opera at the Kennedy Center. So I did that all of last year, and they asked me, I guess the students sort of liked working with me, I guess. So they asked me to stay on as a master teacher this year. So I've been teaching the young artists in DC virtually. I also was offered a position at my alma mater, Siena Heights University. And I didn't know, one of my best friends, Michael Ewan, is the chair of the musical theater department there. And he called me at the beginning of the year and he said, would you ever consider taking on this position here? And I thought about it for 5 minutes. I didn't know how I was going to make it work because my schedule was packed. But I said yes. Immediately I said yes, because I love teaching so much. It's not, for me, teaching and performing are pretty equal on the passion scale for me. I love the idea of passing on my knowledge and making the next generation have it just a little bit easier than I had it, and sharing what my experiences have been, and the different conductors I've worked with, and working with a conductor, that kind of information, working with colleagues, what can I do to help the next generation? So for me, that has been great. And I've been teaching all year throughout the pandemic, which has been a blessing. Rob Ainsley sort of saved my bacon by asking me to stay on as a master teacher this year. And had I not said yes to the university, the Siena Heights University, where I teach, where I'm on faculty, I would be, lost. So I'm very grateful for my teaching positions, and I don't plan on stopping anytime soon. I love it so much, even if, I don't necessarily have as much time as I do now to teach. I still will always keep teaching because it's part of me.
Yeah. And I think it makes also great performers and great musicians, because we learn from what we're teaching, and having to verify things and find concepts for things. And
yes. I know when I teach, there are several amazing sopranos in DC, and when I get to work with them and talk about what I have done, or, talk about the approach to the coloratura or the approach to the pianissimo B flat, which is kind of the money note. When I talk about that, it makes me do it better because I remember it reinforces all the things that I've learned. And then I take what I just taught into the practice room.
Yeah.
And it's, essentially a voice lesson for myself too.
Yeah. What advice would you give young singers if they were listening right now? A one-liner.
Oh, goodness. Only do this job if you can't do anything else. If you don't have it in you. What I mean by that is if you're sure it's your calling. It's the hardest job in the world to do what we do. You have to have passion driving it, or you won't make it. And don't ever give up if you have that passion, because it's also the most rewarding job in the world.
Well, Leah, thank you so much for making time today and joining us and sharing a little bit about you and about your story. Thank you.
Oh, Rachel, it has been such a pleasure to get to know you a little bit. And what you do is amazing. Accompanying yourself in recitals, incredible. And I'm honored to have been asked. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. And guess wishing you a happy New Year too.
Happy New Year to you. Oh my gosh, 2021 is 2 days
I know.
away. I hope 2021 is easy on us.
Please.
No pressure.
Exactly. Just easier. Just like this much easier even.
Yes.
And wishing everyone who tuned in also a really happy New Year.
Yes. Happy New Year, everybody.
Thanks so much, Leah.
Thank you, Rachel. You too.
See you
Bye.
next week. Bye.